Welcome back to session 24. Um, we touched upon the opening sentence of 12 Chinese characters that I separated into two parts. And in the classical Chinese, there was no comma or full stop to separate the words into sentences, because depends on, well, of course, given you're Chinese literate, depends on how you understand, you decide as your own will where and how to break up the words and separate them into sentences. And of course, that could have totally different understanding the way you separate the words into sentences. And this is how I decided to break up the words and separate them into the sentences. And what we covered in 23 sessions so far is about what I separate into the first sentence, which I just reviewed. Once again, the first half of that opening sentence is all the universal laws cannot be reduced for the rules over the very specific matters. And then the second half, or the second 6 Chinese characters of the opening sentence, as I determined, is, again, my personal take of interpretation and translation of the second 6 Chinese characters, is all those particularly described and defined stand to be corrected over time. So that was the first sentence of Dao, 可道, 明, 非常明. Well, following that sentence and immediately correspond to that sentence was what I decided to be the second sentence, which is another, just so happened, 12 Chinese characters. And they are, and I'll start with Chinese, 有名, I'm sorry, 无名, 天地之始, 有名, 万物之母. This actually, I believe, or at least appears to me a little bit easier to understand, and it's I guess, less confusing. Because what it means is, it says the sky and earth came into formation without any names. And then in time, everything eventually received a name. Of course, this is, I believe, referring to the name given by the human beings. So, of course, this is not that difficult to understand. We all know how old is human being, as the result, if you believe in evolution, and how old is the planet Earth. And we came in so much later and began to try to understand Mother Nature, and we try to name them. Or I guess we did name everything as we understood, and we probably just keep updating on the definitions as our discoveries continue, and then the rediscoveries kind of either update the original discoveries where they fail to validate or verify. That, of course, I was referring to the Western school of science, whereas the Chinese especially with the Taoists, that of course trace back all the way very long time ago. Um, the Chinese classical science always had a totally different, I guess, cognitive pattern because it seems to me the Western school of science always, I guess, recognize what appear to be the fact, with the verification proven by the science of the day or of the time, and so that it all makes sense, with the scientific proof. Whereas versus the Chinese classical school of science goes different way, because the Chinese school of science start with this idea that we don't know what we don't know. So if you deny the existence of the unknown that you could either see or hear, or your sensor tells you about the sheer existence, but your knowledge cannot explain that existence. In for the Chinese school of science of the old way, you don't deny that. You basically just say, you tell yourself that, the gigantic world of Mother Nature, what we come to know is so limited. Yeah, so that only proves, we're still learning, as a human being on the whole, and there's so much, a lot to learn, right? So if you try to give a little analogy or this, the Chinese school of science or the pattern of cognition is a huge, very huge circle. Okay, so what is known is probably a little bit much smaller in scale circles inside the big circle, whereas to my best knowledge or understanding, the Western school of science basically have the circle filled up with the quote unquote fact, finding all the evidence to support the recognition of the existence of something, discovered in the Mother Nature. So you look at the Chinese school of science or the cognitive pattern, you see the big circle with a lot of blanks, the space reserved there to be discovered, to be verified, to be validated. Because the presumption there is, there's a lot to be understood. We are not as smart or even wise as we think we are. We just have to admit whatever's out there that we cannot explain, they do exist, except for we don't know the reason why or how. So we don't deny the existence, we just leave it there, and in time we'll probably catch up and find out. That's the Chinese classical science, or the philosophy of the scientific findings, the knowledge accumulations. And so I guess I'll just stop here so that you get the idea what fundamentally is a difference here between the ancient Chinese science and the contemporary, or actually not even contemporary, but it traces back to the modern and ancient Western school of science. So that, I guess I want to point out, Taoism is at the core of the Chinese basic science. And later, we will address in many sessions to come about the classical Chinese science versus the Western school of science. But in this session, we'll stop here for this part. And now we talk about the names. There are many cities in China at one time or another. They used to be big names for cities. Some of them were somewhat metropolitan in contemporary sense, but they did not stay very, very long. So I'll give you an example. Sichuan province, a lot of people know about the spicy food, and that's where the spicy Chinese food, that's where it came from, right? A lot of people believe that was basically imported Mexican jalapeno pepper made the Sichuan spice, I guess, became possible. In fact, the way Sichuan people call the spicy peppers, the red peppers, they don't say like people, the Chinese from other provinces, they would say la jiao, means literally spicy pepper. The Sichuan people, at least the older generation, they say hai jiao. So direct translation would be like sea pepper, and then that makes no sense. But if you know, the Mexicans call it a jalapeno pepper, so hai jiao, it pretty much indicates where that came from, right? Doesn't it? But it goes beyond just that. Sichuan province was a very rich in resources. Tea, as we know today, as a drink, as a big part of a social culture, family and friends sit down and enjoy the tea. It doesn't matter it's English or Russian or Japanese or Turkish. They probably serve the tea differently in specific method, but the culture is still the same. Basically, you have some time to enjoy over the tea while you mingle with the people, having some either stimulating conversation or just, purely having the great family time in solidarity. So all that actually started from Sichuan. That was where the first tea tree was discovered and turned the tea leaves into drink 4,000 years ago, right? So this is all about Sichuan. So we know about Sichuan province, and then when you ask what is the capital city of Sichuan province, everybody will tell you Chengdu. Well, Chengdu actually has not been that old as a city, let alone the capital city, because that was only in the late Manchurian Empire. There's today a very, very small town. By Chinese standard, the small town is called Huayang, and Huayang actually was the capital of the region. But if you go back 3,000 years, you trace back that, long ago, way, I guess, let's just say there was this place that actually they found a, much older, but very isolated, small culture, isolated from the Chinese civilization. And that place was not or at least was not known to others as Chengdu or Huayang. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is the name changes all the time. At its own time, the places probably represent the top of either civilization or regional economy, but in time, they just faded away. But comparing to that, what about Beijing? Beijing has been a capital city for 3,200 some years, right? So this city, from day one, the master planning for the city construction followed very strictly the Taoist rules of, the feng shui. So the four directions, the dragon map, everything. And it stayed for that long. I don't know if there's any city, alone, by itself in China can compete against Beijing when it comes to that. So but that's the city has been there for that long, but the name has changed many, many times. Beijing is only the name given in Ming Empire when the empire decided to migrate its capital from what is known as Nanjing, or the South capital today, to Beijing as we know today, and that is namely the North capital. But before that, it was not named as Beijing or North capital. It was all different names. So the name changes over time, and the context, of course, changed along. But then we know about Shanghai. So what is Shanghai? Literally, Shanghai means embark from the sea. So if you have embark from the sea, you would think logically there has to be a place that you go into the sea from, right? Actually, there was. So corresponding to Shanghai, there was actually Xiahai. And Xiahai means going into the sea. From where? From there. And if you ask the people born, raised in Shanghai, probably for 2 or 3 generations today, you ask them, where is the Xiahai? I will tell you probably 9 out of 10 have no idea. What are you talking about? What is Xiahai? Well, that corresponded with Shanghai, right? So if you ask the people from Shanghai, the locals today, you tell them about this place called Tilan Qiao, means basket bridge. They will tell you, that's where the prison is. And it has been for quite some years. Before the Red Republic, it has been there. But they wouldn't know that was Xiahai. Okay, so the whole place of Shanghai was really just a little fishing village. And this place of a fishing village eventually, because the Manchurian royal court agreed, after they were defeated by the West, they agreed to open this place up as a commercial port place, and which became a colony. So the whole city development, the planning and the execution, the whole thing was done by the Western powers, came and occupied Shanghai. So the planning and the construction of Shanghai never followed the same rules like in Beijing, about the Taoism, in respect with the strictly the 4 directions and all that. So you would see Shanghai, the most famous place is this so-called Bund, and which was the beach of the fishing village, the river beach of the fish, fisherman's place. And of course, they turn into a modern, contemporary, metropolitan place. So that's Shanghai. But up until late Manchurian Empire, Shanghai was, you asked about Shanghai, nobody knew back then, because the regional, and that was at the lowest, government agency, administrative level, was the place today known as Songjiang, and that used to be a county, and now it's a district of Shanghai, And Songjiang was where the lowest level government agency was located. So what was Shanghai? Nobody knew, right? So let's talk about more contemporary cases in the contemporary China. Shenzhen was also a farm county. Okay, so that piece of land by this order of the central Chinese government uh, was made available to a lot of different Chinese government agencies, and they became responsible to develop the allocated regions, and they did. And that was right after the hardcore communism practice was stopped, and the somewhat more market-oriented economy was beginning to explored. And of course, it didn't take too long. Shenzhen became a big city, and today it's probably considered the Silicon Valley for China, right? Lots of I guess private enterprises of the IT industry, electronics industry are pretty much centered in that city. And that's the city today probably provide the best social welfare for its citizens or the residents, registered residents, let's call it that. So we talk about the changes of the places along with the names and what they the significance they carried politically, economically, and they all had their glories in their own times. Beijing today is the only one that I know, stayed for all this long, through 3,200 some years, but the names changed again, and again, right? So this wraps up this session about, the names, what started without the names, and then later with the names, and then the name changes. In the next session, because this one's talking about the name of places, in the next session, I'll talk about the name of people. So until then, ciao.